Well, today I'm strutting my way right out of my comfort zone into the world of floor finishing.
Let's go strutting right now.
This episode is sponsored by Osmo. Nicole and I recently renovated our kitchen, and as part of the renovation, a substantial section of the flooring had to be taken up and laid back down. The old boards were peppered in with the new to help blend everything together, and then the entire area was sanded to remove the stain. Now, we had every intention of staining the floor to match the rest of the floor, but the problem was, once we saw the natural look of that white oak, we were in love, and unfortunately we were kind of stuck, because the rest of the house is continuous dark stained white oak, which creates problems for refinishing. So truth be told, we really weren't fans of that dark stain to begin with, so it sounds like we should be doing the whole thing, but the problem was, at this point, our budget was already stretched super thin. There was no more money to empty out the house, do the rest of the sanding, and have the rest of the floor refinished. So I gave it some thought and trying to think of finishes that you might be able to apply over time, section by section. Now, traditional floor finishes, it's real tough if you stop in the middle of the floor to be able to later, 6 months later, come in, sand this new section and blend it in with the old. That's really hard to do, and in fact, I would guess that most flooring companies won't agree to do that just because they can't guarantee that it's not going to leave a very noticeable line where the finish starts and stops. So what kind of finish could I use that is capable of being blended the way that I need it, but will still give us the protection that we want as well as the look that we're after? A hard wax oil, and specifically Osmo's PolyX oil. Now, you may have seen me apply this in the past to furniture pieces, but in reality, this stuff is really marketed as a floor finish. If you look at all the cans, they typically show a picture of a floor. So it's definitely intended for that purpose. It's familiar territory for Osmo, and it's just a new process for me because I've never applied it on such a large scale. So I'm gonna show you how I put this stuff on the floor. I did have contact with someone with a lot more experience in this world than I have, and I got their advice on how to apply it, but I wanna make sure you understand I'm not professing to be a floor finishing professional. This is just how I handled the situation in my own space, and we'll continue to handle it as we expand the project to other parts of the house. All right, let's jump in. The floor was already sanded by the flooring company to, I believe, what would be a 120 grit equivalent. Unforgivable for furniture, just right for floors, apparently. The cabinets were already in place, and even though the kick plates and trim have yet to be installed, there were a few areas where the finished surfaces met the floor, and those were carefully masked off with blue tape. So the finish of choice here is the classic PolyX oil. We're going to apply the first coat using a brush for the perimeter and a roller for the rest. By the way, my kit came with bonus socks, so I'm going to be wearing them for this job. Basically, I'm working a roughly, 5x5 section at a time, and this isn't like painting. I'm not looking to apply a thick, wet layer. Instead, I'm using a lot of pressure on the roller to try to extend the oil and wax mixture as far as I can. Even when cutting in with the brush, I'm working and reworking the same area quite a bit before dipping back into the finish. Because of this, the coverage that you get out of this stuff is incredible. The entire job will only end up using about half of a single can. So anyway, while I continue to apply this coat, let me explain more about why I chose this finish. We already talked about the logistics issue. There's just no way that we can do a traditional floor finish room by room, which is about all our budget would allow at this point. So I need something that can blend easily from one room to another. This is a microporous finish that bonds with the wood fibers, and you don't need a lot of it to end up with a fairly durable and protective layer. That means when it comes time to do the other rooms, we should be able to blend them together seamlessly. This also means that the floor can easily be spot repaired if and when damage occurs, unlike traditional floor finishes. Another factor in my decision was the low odor. I didn't say no odor, so I'm wearing a respirator and I have the windows open for fresh air. But compared to a traditional finish, this stuff is absolutely tolerable. After the first coat, we did avoid that part of the house for the rest of the day, but by nighttime, even my wife's extra sensitive nose was not bothered by the lingering smell. And I can tell you from personal experience with traditional oil-based and water-based floor finishes, you'll likely need to stay in a hotel if you refinish a floor in your occupied home. So here's an area where an inexperienced floor finisher would get themselves into trouble, and that's working fast enough to make my way around an island. Thankfully, this stuff is forgiving enough that I was able to work my way all the way around and back to my previous wet line without any visible effects. Finishing up with the pantry, I worked my way out of the room, and here you can easily see where the new and old finishes meet. Yes, this is going to be an eyesore for a while. And this is how you stop dogs and kids from trampling an uncured finish. So coat number 1 was left to dry overnight, and here's what it looked like the next morning. Smell report, it just smells fresh, and it's cured enough to walk on with socks. For the second coat, I'm bringing out the big guns. Osmo's Floor X Center, I think that's how you say it. Anyway, it's a nice little buffer. It features a little reservoir for distributing cleaner solution during future maintenance runs. For now, we're just buffing. The second coat is applied in a similar fashion as the first, though this time I'm using a combination of my brush and a white pad for the perimeter work. I find that the pad is a little bit better for distributing the finish in a very thin layer, so you'll see me using it periodically as I experiment and learn. Once the perimeter of an area is done, I get the roller involved again to spread the finish. And this time I'm applying even less with the roller. The buffer with the white non-abrasive pad is going to spread the finish out so well that I really need to be stingy, otherwise I may end up with too much finish on the floor. The goal here is to keep going over each area, moving the pad into the dry areas until you really see no evidence of streaks or pulled finish. And my Osmo socks are in the laundry today, in case you were wondering. As I work my way back, you can really see just how smooth and even the finish looks. The next day, we were able to bring the furniture back, and we'll probably wait about 2 weeks before putting down any area rugs or floor mats. And by the way, to help highlight why this finish is a good choice for a person in my situation, I didn't realize how much of the floor would be exposed under the range, so there were a few holidays. Even a couple days after the finish was already applied, I was able to get under there with a white pad and even out the appearance. And it's like it never happened. And like I said, we only used about half the can. So we've lived with this finish for a couple of months now, and I've learned quite a bit about it. And at this point, I would be normally inclined to give you a pro and con list. The problem is, the things on that pro and con list might be pros or cons depending on your perspective and what you expect out of a floor finish. So instead, let's just call this 5 things you should know. Number 1, this kind of finish is not what most Americans think of when they think of floor finishes. Now I say that not as an insult, this is just an observation. First of all, most of these hard wax oil products, they come from Europe. They're from overseas, and obviously globally we have different standards for what we do in buildings with code, as well as expectations for finishes on floors. And I'm not exactly sure how everything is done outside of the US, but at least in the US we expect a low maintenance or no maintenance impenetrable layer on top of our floors. And usually that's a layer of plastic. So essentially we're interacting with a plastic layer on top of the wood, not the wood itself. And what makes this stuff different is that it's a microporous finish. It's not a layer that will flake or get damaged over time. It just binds to the wood fibers, protects it from spills, and adds additional durability. Is it as durable as a, hard-wearing polyurethane finish? No, it's not. But you're interacting with the wood, it's letting the wood be wood instead of letting the wood be plastic. Number 2, this finish is matte. It's matte. There's no sheen to it. So if you were expecting a high sheen, a high gloss floor, this is not the product for you. Now that said, they do have a liquid wax cleaner that you could use on the floor that I've read in a couple of forum posts where people use that to kind of buff the surface up a little bit to get a little bit more of a satin sheen out of it. And also Osmo does have other products. I'm just talking about this specific product. So when you see the floor, it's not going to be shiny. It's not going to have a huge amount of reflection. It just, when it reflects light, it's more of a diffused reflection. Some people are going to like that and some people aren't. Number 3, this finish is repairable. So if you have a scratch or a dent that you want to work out, you can kind of sand just that little area and then reapply finish, and you don't have any obvious lines between the new and old finish like you would with a traditional floor finish. In fact, most traditional floor finishes, you can't do spot repairs because it's just going to look like plastic sitting on top of plastic. It's no bueno. So this stuff is like infinitely repairable. Number 4, this is not a set it and forget it kind of finish. This one does require some maintenance. So for cleaning, they do have a cleaner that you could dilute, and I just use it in a regular spray mop. It seems to work pretty well, so we use that for routine cleaning. And then once in a while, I don't know, I'm still living with this floor, so I'm figuring it out. But maybe every 6 months to a year, you can use what they call their liquid wax cleaner. And this is something that you would want to rub into the surface or buff into the surface. And what it does is not only cleans the floor, but also refreshes that wax layer, kind of rejuvenates it and brings it back to looking new. This is also the product that I've read that if you buff it into the surface, you can create a little bit of a higher sheen. And number 5, the floor can be a little bit slippery, at least at first. So when we walk on it with socks, we noticed that it was definitely more slippery than the rest of the floor. Now maybe I don't know, is a brand new finished floor generally going to be slippery, or is there a little bit more friction to be had with a traditional finish? But what I can tell you is that over the course of a couple of months, it's really calmed down. Of course, with shoes and regular, footwear, it's no problem whatsoever. It's just if you have a nice clean pair of socks and it is freshly finished, it could be just a little bit slippery, which can be fun, but can also be problematic. So thankfully it has calmed down. So I can't give what I would call a final conclusion on something like this because we're only a couple of months into it and I can only judge it based on what I've seen so far. But what I've seen so far, I like. We have 2 kids and 2 knucklehead dogs, so there's no shortage of scuff marks on the floor already, but it's not something that's super noticeable. They're not really deep, and honestly, I think, as the saying goes, that's gonna buff right out with a quick reapplication or an application of that liquid wax cleaner to refresh the look. I should also say that the kids have had numerous spills. Just the other day, Ava dropped a jar on the floor that broke, and our dogs, of course, well, they're dogs. So when they drink water, it kind of goes everywhere and the slobber goes everywhere. And we haven't seen any, lasting issues as a result of those things. Our dogs also love ice. So when an ice cube or 2 falls from the fridge, we're in the habit of just kind of leaving it there for the pups. And sometimes they don't hear it. The ice cube sits there and we get a little puddle of water. And generally speaking, it doesn't absorb. It just kind of sits there until it evaporates. So I'm honestly a little bit apprehensive about a floor that requires maintenance. But if you look at it from a different perspective, that can actually be a benefit. With a traditional floor finish, especially you get that brand new finish on there and then you have 2 dogs and some kids, it's gonna wear over time. And you clean it and it wears, and you clean it and it wears. And you just kind of get used to the lived-in look of a hardwood floor. But you can't easily make it look brand new again. And that's one of the differences with a finish like this. While it does require a little bit more maintenance, with those maintenance reapplications, you actually end up with a floor that looks brand new. It looks like it did the day it was finished. And that's kind of a cool thing. This is a logic that I use when I answer the question, what finish should I use on my workbench? People ask me that all the time. And I never recommend a film forming finish like a polyurethane, because ultimately the workbench gets beat up. It's not if it gets damaged, it's when it gets damaged. So much like a floor, being able to renew the finish and make it look brand new is kind of good. So I usually recommend oils, hard wax oils, or an oil and wax combination for your workbench. Very easy to reapply and make it look good. Same thing with the floor. At some point in the future, if my dogs ding something up or if the kids spill something and I do wind up with a bit of a stain, I can actually get this floor looking brand new without calling in a professional and without spending a whole lot of extra money. So that's kind of a benefit. But again, this is a very personal thing and it just depends on your perspective. So if you're interested in going in this direction, I advise doing your research. Make sure you know what you're getting into, because this is not going to be the finish for everyone. But if it checks the boxes for you, like it did for me, and it makes something possible that would have otherwise been impossible for you, as it did for me, this might just be the finish you're looking for. All right, so special thanks to Osmo for sponsoring us on this episode, and I really look forward to seeing how this plays out over time. We've got a lot more work to do. I'm not sure how much I'm going to show of it because it's going to look exactly like what we just did, but I certainly will be reporting back as I observe things happening with this floor over time. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.